Hey, it's Joe with Orderflow Labs, and stepping into part two of the volume profile and how to utilize this with intraday movement. What I want to talk about primarily is areas of interest in volume build and volume taper. And so, as I come into an area of interest, let's say that this is my area of interest. If I'm coming from the top down into it, if the volume profile is building into that zone, then I'm seeking continuation because it shows interest here not yet met with lack of interest, or a volume taper. Volume taper was when the volume dwindles off. If it's met with volume taper, then that lets me know that the interest is dying off, and we need to start seeking that bid on the tape in order to position back against into that area of interest and beyond breaching that continuation to the opposite side. And so the primary things are formulating your areas of interest and then watching the build and the taper. And so as that happens, you're going to get areas of distribution. And through that area of distribution, you're going to get low volume nodes and high volume nodes. Placing positioning against these is of primary interest in how to utilize volume as an edge is something that something that we utilize here with Orderflow Labs. But as far as the areas of interest, this is mapped out in a pre-session fashion. That way you can watch the volume build around it. So let's talk about that a little bit. Here we are looking at a distribution with NQ on 1029. And what we're going to do is the yellow line here is the Job pivot, and you can see the extension in targets above that. And so we're going to map this volume profile, which is going to occur on your right here and show you right off the open. So this is a 5-minute candle here. To show you on the first 5-minute candle, what we can see is there more volume building above or below. We can see that that's volume and that interest is above. And so we had a taper to the downside. As this pushed above here, it pushed into this first target line and it began to build volume. In fact, it continued to build volume until that got above, and it was bracketed in between the two targets. Now, even with that taper above, we want to see that come down and make it that decision. We know that based upon this profile here, we have this LVN down here, we have a taper here. So if this were to breach this range, then we'll be seeking that liquidation back into this range. But until then, we know that we can play above that pivot with inventory to continue to build volume. Volume is interest again. So as it builds, you do not want to fade until it lacks. And so as we push up into this mid-range here, we can see initially, boom, another high volume node begins to build, shows us further continuation, and then another one builds there in that candle. As we get up here, we don't have any type of clean taper. We simply just have multiple tiny little high volume nodes that are building, which turn into a distribution. So at this point, you know that this auction is not going to turn south until it breaches that low volume area and seeks a distribution below it. So at this point, it's going to be rotating here and respecting this range of this 722, seeking pushing until that final exhaustion occurs. We see it push up again, it builds volume, pushes up again, it builds volume, builds a distribution, and then here we get that. It pushes up, it begins to taper, and as it pushes into the previous distribution, then it builds volume with. So as volume is building in the direction that you're going, you do not want to be fighting that positioning. Continuing this here, we can see as it respects the low volume nodes below it, continues to build above, and we further have taper at the top. So in looking at this here, we have a distribution here at 785 range and one here at 840, 835. And so if this were to auction below this, then we want to be seeking that auction to be targeting the prior areas of interest. and vice versa. If this were to continue to build volume up here, and instead of just having this taper, then we want to respect that and not allow that to gauge our bias. Here's one to the downside, and we can see off the open, we have more volume building below that pivot there, that yellow line. Now, gauging just off the profile, let's see how this builds out. So we have a distribution build above, and we see that as interest. And so even as we push back down into balance and we have less volume built below, at this point here, it tapers. So the low end of that candle there drops down and dwindles in volume. So that 405 level on the right here is a breach area that if that breaches, it should come back, maybe even respect as it did, and then push back up to clear this volume there. It needs to taper and clean out. So as this pushes back up, it does exactly that. And as that tapers, what happens next is it comes down to the prior distribution, builds more volume. Now we have this low volume area here at 0775, and if we were to build volume below that, then that's showing interest below that range, as it does, until we get down here, which is a very nice tapered, easy, nice drop off volume in order to gauge back up into prior distribution and targets. So utilizing volume taper and LVNs and the distributions as they occur in order to gauge your ranges and find, if you're a breakout trader, you better be breaking out with volume. If not, that's simply a stop run coming back into liquidity. And otherwise, gauging this can help you work your plan on the day in order to find that range and exploit the activity.